Hello, my name is Jeff Steinberg. Today is Monday, April 7th, 2008, and this is the LaRouche Political Action Committee weekly update. For those of you who have been monitoring the developments around the Olympic torch in London and again yesterday in Paris, where Tibetan demonstrators and other anti-Chinese activists attempted to disrupt the Olympic torch run, you get an idea in snapshot form of the fact that we're living through some very, very unusual and very dangerous times. As Lyndon LaRouche has been repeatedly warning in recent weeks, in response to the worst financial collapse perhaps in history, certainly the worst financial collapse in modern times, the forces aligned with the British Empire, the City of London financial oligarchy, allies and assets and dupes throughout Europe, and particularly here in the United States, are in a drive to provoke a third world war centered around Eurasia, particularly targeting the major Asian powers who are the natural allies of the United States, namely China, Russia, and India. The British are committed in much the same way that they were in the 1920s in dealing with a global financial crash by provoking a war, and in so doing, attempting to assure their own political advantage and survival after a prolonged period of conflict in which, in this current case, billions of people are slated to die. The British are moving in Europe to promote the consolidation of a literal fascist corporativist dictatorship through the Lisbon Treaty that would abolish national sovereignty for all governments of Europe and would create a supra-state headquartered in Brussels with a European president, an unelected governing body, and that united fascist Europe would commence a military rearmament in preparation for their part in a war against China, Russia, India, and other nations of Asia. In the United States, the British are running a series of operations which are intended to assure that the outcome of the U.S. presidential elections will serve London interests. And in the meantime, they're using the last remaining months of the Bush-Cheney presidency to assure that the United States is the big loser in this Eurasian war. I've already indicated at least one aspect of the provocations currently being carried out against China. We had the activation of riots in Lhasa, the capital city of Tibet, back at the beginning of March, and this was an escalation point in an anti-China campaign that's been going on for well over a year and has up until this point been focused on repeated attempts on the part of the British and on the part of the Cheney neocon apparatus in the Bush administration to provoke a cross-straits crisis targeting China and blowing up the situation between China and Taiwan. That effort suffered a substantial setback in the recent Taiwanese elections, but nevertheless, the commitment to provoke a major crisis with China continues unabated. So we now have the Tibet flank. China is also a major target of the destabilization that's been going on for the past several years in Darfur, in that part of the Sudan, where China is targeted because of its investments and offers to build infrastructure in Africa in return for access to petroleum and other strategic raw materials of the African continent. This is considered to be a real no-no by the oligarchs in London and their allies in Paris and other European capitals, who have historically viewed Africa as their private looting ground where they carry out population genocide and then steal the raw material wealth of the African continent. Now, last December, at the very same series of summit meetings in Lisbon, Portugal, where the Lisbon Treaty was initially signed by the European governments and is now subject to parliamentary ratification, there was also a Europe-Africa summit meeting at which the European powers made clear their intentions to continue to loot Africa. We saw shortly after that the eruption of the destabilization in Kenya, which was a British orchestrated operation aimed at creating a replay of the Mau Mau tribal wars of the 1950s, where the British were systematically eradicating an educated nationalist elite of African leaders who were committed to the concept of Franklin Roosevelt, namely the end of colonialism in Africa and the establishment of series of sovereign nation states committed to economic development and collaboration with the world. Africa today could be a breadbasket for its own needs and a breadbasket for major parts of the world. Yet the very areas that are in the best position to carry that kind of role are the areas that have been viciously targeted for destabilization, war, and genocide. Look right now at the situation in Zimbabwe, which has been a hated target of the British oligarchy since Zimbabwe initially achieved its independence after a long struggle back in 1980. Remember, Zimbabwe was formerly South Rhodesia, which had been the major center of the Cecil Rhodes British imperial operations in Africa. So we have a situation right now in which the British are going for a confrontation in Zimbabwe parallel to what they ignited in Kenya, and if they succeed, then that destabilization will rapidly spread throughout the entirety of sub-Saharan Africa and cause the worst genocide that the African continent has ever seen. The Mugabe government in Zimbabwe is hated among the European oligarchy, particularly the British, because of their liberation struggle against the British Empire. And Zimbabwe has been targeted through British and British Commonwealth sanctions and other actions for the last years, creating a situation of massive hyperinflation, which is now playing out in the form of the destabilization that is underway and threatens to ignite all of Africa. So you've got China, the first among the Asia targets for major destabilization. Of course, last year we had the assassination of Benazir Bhutto, which ignited the situation in the Pakistan-Afghanistan area of South Asia bordering on Central Asia. You've got the China targeting. You've got the Africa targeting. And politically inside the United States, the British are playing to install one of several of their assets into the presidency by creating a major destabilization within the Democratic Party. Who are some of the major players who are taking a leading role in the effort to use this presidential campaign fight between Senator Clinton and Barack Obama to literally destroy the Democratic Party? Well, first and foremost, you've got Felix Rohatyn, a second-generation synarchist fascist who is the protege of Andre Meyer, who U.S. intelligence in the 1930s and 40s identified as one of the leading pro-fascist bankers in France from the Lazard and Banque Verme's banking interests. Protege of Andre Meyer, Felix Rohatyn, is playing the same kind of role today. Rohatyn is a leading figure in the attacks against Senator Hillary Clinton and the attempt to promote a Barack Obama